Hi, my name is Mr. Chao, and welcome to Chao Time. This is the third out of 4 chronographs in a 4-part chronograph series, each being more expensive than the last. The first was the Sugess, the second was the Bulova. Here's the third, the Seiko SDGZ019. The review starts with my as objective as possible scoring against the rubric to get a total score. I then apply a value multiplier to get the value score, and with those two scores I rank the watches that I reviewed so far. At the end, I give my subjective opinion of the watch as to how it fits in my collection, what I think, and if it's going to stay in my collection. Before we get into the rubric though, I like to talk about I like to identify the watch so that when we look at the rubric, there's a little bit of context. So this is a kind of a sporty chronograph, but also with some dressy aesthetics. So let's get to it. We'll start with the function, feel, and visual appeal of the case and bracelet. The first thing I notice about the watch is how light it is due to the titanium construction. The second thing I noticed was the thickness, coming in at 15 millimeters. Despite the thickness, the lugs curve well and hug the wrist. All touch points are finished well for comfort against the skin. Looking closer, the Seiko's legendary case finishing is on display. Especially impressive is how the titanium is polished. All brushing, which is fine and precise, meet polished areas in crisp straight lines. Speaking of the polish, it's really well executed with no waviness. The touch points are both really nice. First, the polished chronograph pushers require a good push to actuate and have a really well-defined and satisfying click. The crown is large and very easy to use with tall ridges. There's a black insert on top. I'm not sure what it's made of and could very well be made of plastic, although I hope it's onyx or some stone. You might be able to see it doesn't really have any scratches, and I would expect it to if it was made of some sort of polymer or plastic. If you know, please let me know in the comments. Sitting on top is a flat sapphire crystal with a clear AR coating. It is beveled to match the angle of the bezel. The case back is also sapphire, which is always nice. The bracelet is a faux 5-link affair. As with all Seiko bracelets, it only pivots on one side. It's a combination of polished and brushed, which catches the light. The links are held together with the old Seiko pin and collar system. There is a double push button deployment clasp, all milled and high quality. Seiko is etched into the clasp area. When handling the bracelet, it feels solid and not at all jingly. The tolerances are not incredibly tight, and that helps with the bracelet conforming to the wrist. 9 out of 10 for form, 8.5 out of 10 for function. Let's move on to that dial. There's a lot going on here. The black dial texture is a gouache sunburst pattern that under macro inspection is really well executed. The only exception is what appears to be a dent next to the 1 o'clock marker. I'm going to assume that it came from the factory like this, but it could very well have been caused by a watchmaker or amateur hobbyist. Moving on, there are many elements on this dial that help give it depth. To start, the hour markers are tall and faceted. They are grooved along the top, which helps to refract the light. They're also polished and do an excellent job of creating shimmers. The hands are brushed, and here you see a minor issue. The brushing on top is not perfectly parallel with the hand. The Seiko nameplate is also applied and looks to be sandblasted. The chronograph subdials have an applied surround with the mini second hand left alone. Next, the painted elements. The second hand subdial hands, the word automatic, minute track, tachometer scale, and subdials are all painted in high quality. The paint is applied thick and stands out when looked at through a loupe. Not a single mistake can be seen here. The date disc is black to match the dial, which is nice. The watch has a tiny bit of lume on the hands, and they don't stay illuminated for long, but at least it's fairly bright. When looked at as a cohesive design, the dial is uncluttered and easy to read. 9 out of 10 for form, 7 out of 10 for function. Let's move on to this chronograph movement. The movement in this watch is the 8R48. This is a movement I wish Seiko used more in their watches. It's one of the few Seikos with a high beat 28,800 vibrations per hour. It has 34 joules and a 45-hour power reserve. The chronograph components have a vertical clutch and column wheel, which ensures that the chronograph cannot be reset on accident when running. It has the Seiko magic lever technology, as well as Diashock shock absorbers. The movement is related to the 6R15 movement, so claimed accuracy is not great at -25 to +10 seconds per day. The movement also lacks any high-end finishing, as you can see here, and as you can see here, looks to be a bit over-oiled. I should probably get this movement serviced the next time I go back to Taiwan. The movement is striving to be better than its Seiko brethren, but is still a classic Seiko workhorse movement with little in terms of quality control issues or high maintenance costs. 6.5 for both form and function, giving us a total score so far of 46.5. Let's move on to the most subjective category, the brand's heritage and prestige. Seiko has a tremendous history dating back to 1881. They have a variety of interesting achievements, such as battering the Swiss brands in their own observatory chronometer trials, the invention of the first quartz movement, the spring drive movement, the first titanium dive watch, and the first automatic chronograph. In modern times, Seiko has enjoyed a surge in popularity as their total customer base seems to be growing. But as they grow in popularity, their prices are moving up market. The sentiment for Seiko has soured quite a bit for some long-term fans. I feel bad scoring this category for what Seiko is today rather than what Seiko was when the watch was introduced, when Seiko was producing watches with a greater bang for the buck ratio. I believe that Seiko as a brand still sits just outside the Swiss giants in terms of status and image, and as such, the brand sits just outside the scores of the luxury Swiss circle. 6 out of 10 for brand heritage and prestige, giving us a total score of 52.5. This watch is no longer in production, but surprisingly can be found new online for about $2,000. But used ones do pop up on the forums and other places periodically for about $900 to $1,000. If we go with the lower price, which is what I bought it for, that gives the watch a value multiplier of 1.427, bringing the value score up to 74.9175. That places the watch at an impressive 10th place in total score and all the way up in 5th place in value. That brings me to my personal opinion on this watch, but first let's take a look at those rankings again. I'm surprised it did so well. I knew it was going to score well against other watches, but wow, it's the cheapest watch in the top 10. In fact, the closest watch in price in the top 10 is 3 times more expensive, with some of the others coming in at 5 to 8 times more expensive. When looking at the value rankings, it's also very impressive. It's the most expensive brand in the top 5. In fact, it's 3 to 7 times more expensive than these other watches. If you're not entirely sure what all this means, basically it competes with expensive watches, spec for spec, and competes with cheaper watches in terms of bang for buck. So again, really amazing. Like many people, I was drawn to the hype and the aesthetics of the current Speedtimer, the one that was just introduced recently, I believe either in late 2021 or early 2022. And I actually considered buying one of those. And that's when I started looking at Seiko chronographs. But there were some things about the cheaper version of the Speedtimer that I just could not deal with. First, one of the subdials is actually just a 24-hour hand, which is not a GMT hand. It's not independently adjustable. It's just a 24-hour hand, which I think is just a waste of a complication. Second, the chronograph pushers are really mushy because it's a quartz watch, and just the way that they actuate, I don't like the way that it feels. Third, it's 13 millimeters in thickness, which I think is too thick for a quartz watch. When I buy a quartz watch, I want it to not be so bulky because I just kind of I don't like watches that are very thick. And so with those three things combined, it would just put me off. And then the higher end Speedtimer, which actually has a version of this movement, is priced beyond my willingness to pay for a Seiko. So knowing the cheaper version of the Speedtimer was going to be a catch and release, and that I just didn't want to buy the more expensive one. So when I was looking, I came across these Seiko Brights watches, this one particularly from the mid 2010s, and they're basically a mix between a modern high beat automatic and the quartz version, but in titanium. And I really think that this watch came at a time when Seiko was really trying to up their game. There are so many classic Seikos from this time period, from the Alpinist, the Cocktail Time, the Sarb series of baby grand Seikos, the Samurai, the Monster, the Sumo. They have a really massive catalog, and especially in the JDM models, there are just so many gems from this area. And I was pretty vocal in my last Seiko video about, well, I don't know if it was my last Seiko video, but it was about the 62 Mas reissue, which I bought new and was really disappointed with. And that's when I really started to, like, my respect for the Seiko brand was diminishing. They went from my favorite watch brand to feeling like I'd never buy another new Seiko. Luckily, there are still a lot of great finds from this time period that are good watches, especially for the money. Anyway, this watch has a lot of what I would like in this kind of watch. It's high beat, it has the technology such as the column wheel and vertical clutch, it has really nice touch points, it's relatively cheap. If you don't like this color combination, like I said earlier, there are others. The size is perfect for my 16.5 centimeter wrist. It has 100 meters of water resistance. It's titanium, which is probably my favorite material for watch cases when it's done correctly. Of course, it's not quite perfect. I do wish the hour markers had a little bit of lume. I'm not really sure about all these polished bits here on the links. And this little black onyx tip or whatever it's made of, it's a little bit tacky. And even though it does fit on my wrist nicely, I would have preferred a half link on the bracelet for size adjustments. If I gain or lose too much weight, which I am prone to do, this will not fit very well, and that's one of my pet peeves with watches that don't have micro adjust. So when it comes to if this watch is staying in my collection, I think it is. Perhaps not this particular model for the long run, but I could definitely see myself hanging on to it until I find something else. There's a couple of other colorways that I think are really, really nice, and I might swap it out at some point, but I do think that this basic model of watch is definitely staying in my collection. Like I said, I love titanium watches. I do like having chronographs in my collection, and out of the 4 chronographs that I'm reviewing, this is definitely a surprise in terms of its value and what it brings to the table. So, what'd you think of the review? Is there anything that you would change about the scoring, or is there anything that you would like me to review in the future? Let me know in the comments below. Thanks for making it all the way to the end. I appreciate you. Thanks. Bye.